Hello everyone, welcome to the new unit of the course. So we are finally moving on from AutoCAD and we're moving into the Adobe suite of tools. So first we're going to be covering Photoshop for 3 weeks, and then after we cover Photoshop we're going to be diving into InDesign for 1 week. In this video I just basically want to explain what my approach is for how I'm going to be covering Photoshop. And then we will get started looking at a few basic functions together. But basically every week how I'm going to be treating this, since it's all online now, is I'm going to be leaning a bit heavier into the LinkedIn Learning courses that are available. And I'm going to be using those to basically teach the basics of how to use the Photoshop tools. So how to navigate around the program, what tools are available and what the tools do. Those will be explained by these LinkedIn Learning courses. And then once you've watched those, you'll basically come into my courses with a background understanding, because I'm not going to be covering them as in-depth or in detailed. And then you will actually see me use those tools that you have learned about in these videos, but my videos will be geared more toward things that you'll be doing more specifically in the interior design industry. So if you've used Photoshop in the past, or you've messed around with it before, typically Photoshop is used for photography. That's the most common thing that people use it for. A lot of photographers use it for retouching, editing, color manipulation, things like that. But in our case, in the interior design architecture industries, we use Photoshop in a very specific way that's a lot more different than how it's traditionally used in other industries. Okay, so that type of content you're not going to see as much unless you're going on YouTube and specifically looking for it. So basically I'm going to be covering that a lot more in depth, and it's going to be a lot of stuff that is geared more specifically to what you'll actually be doing in a real job. Okay, so this first course that I have right here, Introducing Photoshop, this one came out actually at the beginning of this month, so this is really recent, and this is a really good, concise introduction to Photoshop. It's only 3 hours long. Basically what I'll be doing is assigning 2 of these sections of the video tutorials to you per week. So this first week we're going to be doing the image file and selections and masks, but since there's 6 sections, basically it's going to be 2 per week. And if you want to dive into this a little bit deeper, because this definitely doesn't cover everything, there's another course that's really good, and this course is called Photoshop 2020 Essential Training, The Basics. And this one's about twice as long, and it just goes into a lot more detail about all the tools that are available in Photoshop. So I definitely recommend, if you want to learn more of the tips and tricks and all the things that Photoshop can do, jumping into this course as well. There are a few videos that I think I'm going to pull from this and have you guys watch. So I'll find the most important ones that I think are important for you to know, and I will add that into the videos that I want you to watch for the week. But it'll basically be like the AutoCAD unit, where I am creating a video playlist and then I'm assigning it to you, and then you go through and you just watch whatever I assign. All right, so then once you're good on that content, come over to my videos and you'll see me using the tools that you just learned about, but I won't be covering them as in depth, okay, since you should already be familiar with them from these videos. All right, so Photoshop, it can be really fun. I love using Photoshop. If you guys have already used it before, I'm sure you're familiar with the cool things that you can do with it. It's a really interesting program for being creative. So I know whenever we're using other tools such as AutoCAD, that is a very technical tool, and there's a lot of things that you have to get very precise in AutoCAD, and it's so rigid and it's not very creative. And a tool like Photoshop is much more artistic. So if that's more up your alley, I think you're going to enjoy learning how to use Photoshop a lot more than AutoCAD. All right, but we have to have a blend of both sides in this industry. You have to be really good with your technical skills, and you have to be really good with your creative and artistic side as well. So this one is going to be probably a little bit less serious and intense than the AutoCAD unit. And I think well, at least I'm hoping that you guys will be able to have a little bit more fun with it. All right, there's going to be labs every week just like there was before. And then there's also going to be another practical assignment, and the practical assignment is going to build directly off of the practical assignment from AutoCAD. So we'll be taking the drawings that we created for that practical assignment, we'll be bringing them over to Photoshop, and we will be doing renderings of them. Okay, so I feel like that's going to give you a really good understanding of the entire scope of a project, from beginning to just creating some hard line drawings in a very technical program like AutoCAD, and then bringing them over to a program like Photoshop and being able to add layers of materiality and then depth and detail, so that way you can take just boring 2D line work and turn it into a really compelling and interesting image. All right, so before jumping into Photoshop, I wanted to run through this article with you guys and introduce you to different image file formats. So I'm sure you've encountered some of these file formats in the past, but I'm going to run through it in a little bit more detail and explain to you exactly what these different formats mean. Okay, so we're just going to run through this. So looking at this diagram here, you can see that there are two different categories of image file formats. We have raster images and we have vector images. All right, so Photoshop is a raster image editor. Okay, so these are the type of file formats that you'll most commonly run into when using Photoshop. We have JPEG. I'm sure everybody has probably heard of a JPEG before. That is one of the most common file formats that we'll be using. You have GIFs, so we're probably also familiar with GIFs. So those are animated images, that move, and you usually send those to your friends, over text. Then we have PNGs. PNGs are used a lot for interior design architecture. So we're going to mainly be using JPEGs and PNGs for the most part. These allow you to do transparency. So basically you can cut the background out of an image and you can save it, and it will retain the image without a background inside of it. And you'll be seeing how we use that later on. We have TIFFs. These are usually really big files and they're really high quality. We don't really use those too much, but these are a lot more commonly used in print media like magazines and stuff, when they really need to preserve high quality images, or if it's going to be like a really large image that's going on like a billboard or something. Raw images, these are usually image files that come straight from a camera. And then we have PSDs, and PSDs are basically Photoshop's proprietary image format. All right, so the biggest ones you'll have to worry about in this section here is JPEG and PNG and PSD. All right, so then there are also vector images, and these are things like PDF, EPS, AI, which is Adobe Illustrator, and SVG. So you can relate the two of these categories. Raster images you can relate to Photoshop, and vector images you can relate to Adobe Illustrator. We're not going to be covering Adobe Illustrator in this class, but if you have friends who are in the VCD program, or know any graphic designers, usually they work a lot in Adobe Illustrator. And basically the main difference between raster images and vector images is a raster image is a image file that's made up of individual pixels. Okay, so if you've ever looked at an image and you've noticed how maybe it's like fuzzy or pixelated, that indicates that that image file is a raster image. And if you've ever looked at like a logo or something, that's usually a vector image. So basically a vector image is an image that it's calculated by the computer mathematically, and you can scale it infinitely and it won't lose quality, right? So usually those are used a lot more for illustrations and logos and things like that. And then raster images are used for like photographs, okay? So again, there's all our file formats. So this is explaining that in a little bit more detail. What is a raster image? Raster images are made up of a grid of dots called pixels, and each pixel is assigned a color. Unlike vector images, raster images are resolution dependent, meaning they exist at one size. When you transform a raster image, you stretch the pixels themselves, which can create a pixelated or blurry image. So I'm sure we've all run into this in the past, like if you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation or something, maybe you grabbed a photo offline and you dumped it onto your page and then you stretched it and made it bigger, and you notice that the bigger that you made it, the fuzzier the picture became. That's because pictures have a specific resolution assigned to them, and if you stretch them beyond that resolution, they begin to lose quality as they get bigger. The opposite is true with vectors. Vector images, you can stretch and make as big as you want, and they're not going to lose quality as they get bigger. Here we go. Raster images are typically used for photographs, digital artwork, and web graphics such as banner ads and email graphics. And Photoshop is the industry standard image editor that is used to create, design, edit raster images, as well as add effects, shadows, textures to existing designs. We also have what's known as CMYK versus RGB. So these are different color models that we have available to us in Photoshop, and CMYK is usually a color model that's used for printers, and mostly everything else is going to be in RGB. So RGB is the main thing that we'll have to worry about. But basically CMYK uses a 4-color printing process that stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key black. So if you've ever changed cartridges inside of your printer at home, you'll notice that whenever you go to buy them at the store and put them in, you have these 4 colors. You have cyan, magenta, yellow, and you have K, which is black. All right, and we can see that right here. They're the different colors of CMYK. And then RGB is light-based color model, and that stands for red, green, and blue. And basically these 3 primary colors are all combined together in different quantities, and they're used to make up every color that is in the color spectrum, okay? So you don't need to be like a super expert on what exactly these 2 color models mean, but just be familiar that these 2 different models exist, and we typically want to be working with RGB. So whenever we get into Photoshop, you'll kind of see what I mean by how our image is set up on an RGB spectrum. We also have what's known as lossy versus lossless images. So basically raster image files are either lossy or lossless. JPEG is an example of a lossy image file. So basically what that means is whenever you save out an image as a JPEG file, it will compress the data inside of it, and the quality will kind of go down. And compression is nice because it makes the file size smaller. You know, whenever we're working on these image files, they can become huge and take up a lot of space on your computer. So oftentimes you'll want to reduce the file size as much as you can so that your computer runs efficiently and things don't take forever to like upload or process. But using a format like a JPEG comes with a cost because, it might look really good in Photoshop, but once you save it as a JPEG, it might lose some of that quality because of how it's being compressed. So again, if it's being compressed, that's what's known as a lossy image format. Other formats are not lossy. So that means that they're going to preserve them at the full quality. So like TIFF is an example of a non-lossy image format because there's no compression going on and it's not modifying the quality of the image. So here you can see side by side, for example, this one is not compressed, so you can see the full resolution and quality. Nothing looks blurry at all, but then when you save it out maybe as a JPEG, and this is a pretty extreme example, it doesn't tend to look this bad usually, but you know, there will be some compression, and the more it's compressed, the worse the quality is going to look in the end. All right, so these are some times when you should use JPEG files. So when you're dealing with online photos and or artwork, JPEGs offer you a lot of flexibility with raster editing and compression, making them ideal for web images that need to be downloaded quickly. If you want to print out photos or artwork, you can use those. You can turn down the compression setting to make them a little bit higher quality. And if you need to send a quick image to somebody, you can use JPEG. JPEG, again, is the most universal format, and it's used for mostly everything. That's probably what you're going to use the most, but just be aware that it is a lossy format, and if you want the most quality out of your image, it might not be the best choice. Another thing is you don't want to use a JPEG when you have a graphic that needs to be transparent. So when I talked about PNGs a minute ago, I said you can delete the backgrounds out of PNGs, and basically you're just left with whatever's remaining in the image without a background. So if you have like a silhouette or something, like a black silhouette against a white background, I could cut out the white background, and then when I go to put that onto a layout like an InDesign or something, there's not going to be that white border around my subject. Okay, so in that case, you'd want to use like a PNG file because that supports cutting out the backgrounds or adding transparency to your files. If I was to cut out the background of my image and then save as a JPEG, whenever I would load that into InDesign, it would add the white background back in because it doesn't support that feature. And as we go forward and start using some of these different file formats, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. GIF we're going to skip over because we're not going to really be using GIFs at all. So PNGs, here is a good example of what I mean by the backgrounds. So let's say that you have this image or you have these different images here, and you can see how this gray background basically goes through the images. So if you have these little islands here where you can see the gray background through it, basically just think of these icons of the unicorn as a sticker that's on top of this gray background. So when you bring the image in, it's literally just the unicorn, and you're basically applying it as a sticker on top of this big gray background. There's no background that is tied to the image, and that's because it's a PNG and the background has been deleted out. All right, so PNGs are lossless, so they don't have compression associated with them like a JPEG file would, and it has built-in transparency, like I said, higher color depths, a lot of technical stuff. Just be familiar with PNG has transparency and you can cut backgrounds out. That's when you're really going to want to use them, okay? TIFFs, so these are really high quality image files. You're really not going to have to worry about these too much because they're really, really big files and they are really high quality, but they're massive and they take up a lot of space. So we're not really going to mess around with TIFFs too much. And then PSDs. So PSDs, we're going to use these a lot, and PSDs are basically the default file format whenever we're using Photoshop and we save a file. We'll want to save that as a PSD file, and then from there, when we have our PSD file, we'll export different file formats out of it. So our Photoshop file, you can think of that as like in AutoCAD, like we had DWG files. PSD files are Photoshop's equivalent to AutoCAD's like DWG file. And then basically within our DWG files, we export out PDF files, right? So you can think of it that way. PSD is basically our project file, and then we're going to be exporting out different image formats from the project file. So I can create, from this image here, I could export out a JPEG, I could export out a PNG, a TIFF, whatever file format I want, depending on what I'm going to be using it for. The nice thing about PSD files is they are image files just like all these other ones, and you can open them and view them online like if the web page supports it. But they also preserve layers. So we're going to be using layers quite a bit. And if you save a file as a PSD and send it to somebody, when they open it, it will still have all these layers intact and they won't go away. With a JPEG or a PNG file, if you were to save that out and send it to somebody, the layers here would be gone. Basically, it takes the image file and it flattens all the layers together, and then the layers go away and you can't manipulate the layers individually. All right, that's going to make a lot more sense as we go forward, but just be familiar that PSD is the default file format for Photoshop, and it will preserve all of your layers that you have set up. All right, so vector images, these are usually used by graphic designers, and basically when you think of vector, just think it can be scaled infinitely, okay? You're not going to use vectors too much, like I said, because, you know, with what we do in interior design and architecture, there's just not as much of a need. Usually if we use like Adobe Illustrator to do something, it's going to be something with our like presentation drawings. If for some reason we need to blow those up really big for a presentation or something like that, then we might go in and use Adobe Illustrator to you know, it's really good for like diagrammatic presentations, okay? But that's a lot more on the architecture side. They use Adobe Illustrator a lot more than we do. Usually there's not as much of a need for it. Usually Photoshop is the better tool for us, which is why we don't focus on Illustrator and vector graphics as much. But just be familiar with it. Basically, you can scale infinitely, and they're usually used for like illustrations, so things that are drawn. Photographs are really not going to be vector files, okay? Here you can see them using Adobe Illustrator to create vector files, and that's basically it. So I just wanted to run through that and make sure that you are familiar with all these different file formats, and then we will go ahead and we will jump into Photoshop, and we will start taking a look at a few of the things within there. All right, so here we are inside Photoshop. And when you first start up Photoshop, you're going to just be at this welcome screen. We have this area down here that shows us any files that we've worked on in the past. And then over here at the left, we have a Create New button and we have an Open button. The Create New button is basically what you're going to use if you're creating something from scratch. So if there's no file that you want to open up, like a photo or something that you want to manipulate or change, you'll use Create New and you'll create a blank document. For this video, what I'm going to do is actually open a couple of files. These files are added to this video, so they're attached to it, and these two files are actually going to be used for Lab 1, so I recommend you open them and follow along with the video so that you understand what exactly we're doing for Lab 1. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go down here to Open. I'm going to navigate to my files. So right now I'm going to open up this first file right here that's just called Living Room. All right, so go ahead and open up Living Room. And this will take us to the actual Photoshop screen where we can actually work on the image. And by default, we just get the image right here in the viewport in the center. After watching the LinkedIn Learning videos, which I recommend stopping now and watching those if you haven't yet, you should be familiar with the workspace. So over here on the left is our main toolbar. These are all the different tools that we're going to be using to manipulate our images. Up here along the top are basically settings that we get for each tool when we click on them. So you'll see this bar change as we go through and choose different tools. And then up here at the top is our file menu, and this is what we go to edit different characteristics of the image, okay? Over here on the right side, I have a color palette. So if I want to change my colors that I'm using, like say, for instance, if I'm using a paintbrush or something, I can come over here and I can drag my mouse around and select different colors that are available. We have this slider here to change our hue, and then we can go in and change the actual value of our color. Now as I do that and I change my color, you'll see down here in the bottom left, these two color swatches, you'll see this top one change. All right, so basically these are what's known as my foreground color and my background color. So basically I can always have two different colors selected at one time. Right now my foreground color is this purple color and my background color is this peach color. Using this arrow right here, I can click on that and swap which one is my foreground color and which one is my background color. Alright, so now I have green as my foreground, purple as my background. Let's say for instance I want to start painting on top of this image for some reason, just to illustrate how these colors work. What I'm going to do, if you want to follow along, is I'm going to create a new layer. So you can see down here in my layers panel that I have the background image layer. This is just the image itself, and we can toggle that on and off with our visibility setting. So this little eyeball right here, we'll turn that on and off. And here I've created a new layer on top of that. And basically any layer you have selected, so you'll know that it's selected if it has this little bracket around the preview icon here, and if it's a lighter gray color. But basically any layer that is selected is my current layer that I'm going to be, painting on or editing. All right, so after I create my new layer, I'm going to just put it right there, and then we can rename this layer if we want by double clicking on its name. So I'm just going to type in paintbrush. And this is the layer I'm going to use to illustrate, how the paintbrush tool works and how different colors work. All right, so now if I go over here to my drawing panel, I have the brush tool. So if you hover over these two, you'll get like a nice little illustration of how these tools work. So if you ever forget, it's going to give you a little example. So I'm going to click on my brush tool, and then basically the color that I have set as my foreground color is the color that will be painted. So if I go in here now and I just hold my mouse button and start dragging, you'll see now I'm painting with my foreground color. Okay. If I want to change with my background color, I can click on the swap button, and that's going to switch me to purple. And now when I start painting, you can see now I'm painting purple. Along with the paintbrush tool, if you look up here in the top, we get a lot of different options for how we can change our paintbrush itself. So basically, if you click on this little drop down next to this section right here, we're going to get different options for different paintbrushes. Okay, so by default we get all different kinds of paintbrushes. They're going to do different things. There's like pastels, there's pens, there's pencils. You get crazy things like clouds. You can do all kinds of really cool stuff with these paintbrushes. Basically you can go in here, you can modify different characteristics of your brush. So right now by default I have the soft round brush selected. But then we also have like a hard round brush. So if I select that, you'll see what will happen to these sliders here. My setting will go all the way from not hard at all to fully hard. So that's basically controlling this edge here and how defined it is. All right, so we can also go in and increase our brush size. And you can do that using the slider here, and you'll see as I increase the brush size, the actual cursor will get larger, so you can see that cursor is now bigger, and if I move that down it gets smaller. We can also do this with the bracket keys. Okay, so if you look at your bracket keys on your keyboard right here, if you look at my overlay on my screen, these are my bracket keys, and if I click and hold on them, my cursor is going to get bigger and smaller just by clicking on them. So now you can see what the different hardnesses of the brushes do. So if I go in and I start painting now, you can see if we zoom in a little bit by holding the Alt key and using our middle mouse button, that the edge of that brush is nice and straight and hard. But if we go back and switch to the soft round brush and I go in and paint, now you can see that that is really faded and it's just a nice soft subtle transition. All right, so basically that's how you use your colors, and that's how they work with the brushes. But now I'm going to jump in and show you something a little bit more specific to interior design. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn that layer off. what I'm going to do is show you some ways we can start editing and manipulating the images that we bring in. All right. So starting off, I'm going to jump up to my image tools. So if we go up here to the image section at the top, and then we go here to image size, I need to explain something really quick about resolution. So whenever we are editing images or we're creating a new file from scratch, we are going to have a specific resolution that is tied to the image. So by default, you can see that this image right here has a resolution of 72. This is basically what is known as the pixels per inch. Okay, so basically every inch of this image, for every inch, there's going to be 72 pixels associated with it. All right, so what do I mean by pixels? Like I said, this is a raster image. If I zoom in here, get really close, you can see the individual pixels that make up the image. All right, so basically with the current setting, for every inch in our file, we're going to have a 72 pixels in a square. Okay. If I were to go back into my image settings, go back to image size and take a closer look at that. For example, if I were to turn that down really low to something like 10, you can see that it's going to make the image a lot smaller. When I click on OK, you can see what this does. So now the image is really small, and if I zoom in on it, it's very blurry and low quality. All right, so now for every inch that we have, every square inch that we have on this image, we only have 10 pixels, whereas before we had 72 pixels. So since there's a lot less pixels per inch, the quality goes way down because it can't, you can't add as much information into the image that way. So if I undo that really quick with Control Z and I go back in here, we could take that to the other end of the spectrum. So if I go to the image size and I up the resolution to like 150, the picture is going to be a little bit bigger and things are going to be zoomed, or they're going to be smoothed out a little bit more when we zoom in because there's a lot more dense pixel information that's going on. Okay, so as we're working, let me undo that. As we're working and we are creating images, we want to use a reasonable resolution setting so that it doesn't appear pixelated and it's at a high quality for whatever size we're printing out as. Now, resolution and stuff is pretty technical. You just have to be familiar, with a rough size of what you're printing out at and how big or how much resolution you're probably going to need. In terms of this pixels per inch setting, so if I go back to my image size, in terms of this resolution where you put in pixels per inch, you're never really going to want to go over 300, and I would say 300 is at the very high end of the spectrum. Usually you'll want to be working around 150 or so, but yeah, you never go under 72 and never go over 300 is a good rule of thumb. You can see as I raise this resolution as well, the image size here, right now it's 2.6 megabytes. If I were to bump that up to like 300, you can see now that's like 46 megabytes. So as you add resolution into the file is going to increase in size exponentially, and it's really going to slow down your computer. So it's important that you don't set this too high whenever you're working on an image, because usually it's not necessary to go that high, for one, because you're never going to zoom in so close that you're going to see all that detail. And two, it's just going to make the file so huge that it's going to be unworkable. So I'd recommend working somewhere around 150. If you're opening a file from the internet, like we're doing in this example, just usually leave it at the default resolution unless it's like really small. So I'm going to set that back to 72 and just leave it like 72 for the time being. So 72, click OK. All right, so now with that out of the way, I'm going to show you how we can start changing things about this image using the tools that we have available to us. All right, so this is going to be part of your assignment. I'm going to have you change a few of these elements on your own, and obviously I don't want you to match exactly what I'm doing. So anything that I do here, just you can find any. I'm going to have you change 3 things about the image, any 3 things you want. I'm going to show you how to do a paint color. I'm going to show you how to change like maybe this image behind the sofa, and then I might show you how to change the color of one of these chairs or something like that. You can choose any 3 things that you want. Just make sure that whatever you do does not match exactly what I have. So if you do a paint color, make sure it's like a different paint color than mine. If you do an image behind the sofa, make sure it's a different image than what I choose. Okay. So what I'm going to do, let's say first starting out, I want to change the paint color that we are seeing behind the sofa, all right, and on the wall over here. What I will want to do is I want to start making selections on the image, okay? So that way we can isolate just the wall that has a paint color that's tied to it. All right, so to do that, what I always like to do is go in and I always like to make a duplicate of the original image. So to do that, you want to click on your image here where it says background and then click on Control and J, and that is going to create a copy for you directly above the original layer. Okay, so you can also do that by clicking on the image and then if you right click and then go to duplicate layer, that will do the same thing. But Control and J is the shortcut. Okay, I'm going to delete out my paintbrush layer that I used just a minute ago. So if I select that and then click on this trash can icon, that's going to delete that layer out. I'm going to click on yes. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is go in here and we want to start making a selection of just this wall that is behind the sofa. So there are a few different ways that we can go about doing this. One of the most common ways to start making selections is using a tool called the Magic Wand. The Magic Wand is this tool right here. If you click on that, we get settings up here for a tolerance, and then we have this button right here that says contiguous. These are the 2 settings we'll mainly want to be using. Basically though, if I were to zoom in on my image a little bit so I can just see the background color, I want to make sure that this layer is selected, so I'll make sure I'm on my background copy layer. I want to choose my Magic Wand tool. And then if you go in and you start clicking around, you can see that it's basically going to sample like colors inside of the image. So if we click on the blue, for example, you can see that it starts adding in anything that's relatively close to the blue inside of the entire image. Now, this is a pretty bad selection, and you can see that based on these lines here, these are what's known as like marching ants because they're moving. That's what a lot of people call them, marching ants. You can see that my selection is pretty bad. And if I were to isolate just that selection for you, let me show you what we have. So basically that's what's selected. So that's pretty bad, and that didn't give us what we want. So we have to do a little bit more work to our selection. Okay, going back to my Magic Wand tool. So so this was our original selection. Let's try to get that a little bit better. One thing we can do to get that better is turn on this contiguous option. So basically what contiguous does is it will not search for the color throughout the entire image. It's only going to search for that color in regions that directly connect to one another. So if I turn that on and then I go in here and I choose my Magic Wand again, you can see now it's limited to everywhere that it can reach. Okay, and this is good. This is a good start. And we can go in here and we can start adding more to our selection. So to do that, we can hold the Shift key, and you can see next to my cursor I get this little plus icon. That means that the next click is going to add to my selection that I've already started. So now I can go in here and then click somewhere over here, and you can see now that it's added more to this wall. Okay. Another thing that you're noticing though is when we get in here, it's actually selecting pieces of this lamp right here, and it's not selecting parts of like where there's a shadow. And we're also getting a little bit of our sofa. So to fix that, what we would want to do is mess around with our tolerance setting. So a tolerance is basically saying how close to the color that I clicked on does it need to be selected. If we turn that tolerance setting up, it's going to be more lenient in the colors that it chooses. And if we turn it down, it's going to be really restrictive and only find colors that are really, really close to the color that we chose. So if I would turn that down to like 10, okay, and if I were to undo my previous selection, now with a tolerance of 10, if I go in here and use select, you can see now it's not getting this highlight in here that is on this lampshade because it's not close enough to the blue color that I clicked up here. All right, so that is one way that you can go about doing this. You can kind of go around and individually add to your selection and then get as much of it as you can with the magic wand tool. All right, so we can go in here, for example, inside of this leaf, and we can add a little bit more to our selection. Now, if there was something that we wanted to remove from our selection, that would be the Alt key. If you would hold the Alt key and zoom in on a part you don't want and click on it, it would take those pieces away from your selection. All right. All right, so that is one way we can do it. And basically, once you start working on your selections, you can add on to them using other tools that are over here in our toolbar. So I'm just going to leave that selection as is. And now, for example, if I were to come over here and I could go to this rectangular marquee tool. So this tool basically creates a rectangular selection, and it's basically just like a window. So like in AutoCAD, whenever we create rectangular window selections, it's basically the same thing. If I were to click on that now and keep going on this, I could, for example, hold my Shift key and start drawing a window from right to left and get that right up against the edge of my picture here. And then when I release it, you can see I have a perfectly straight line and my selection is going right up to the edge of my image that's there. Over here, you can see that I have a little bit more work to do to clean that up. So I can do another selection over here, align my selection with those pixels that are already selected, and add to that selection to clean that up a little bit closer. Okay. Up here on top, do the same thing. Oh. And get that so it's right flush against the image. Okay, something else that is really cool for selections while we were going through and doing this is a thing called rulers. So if you go to your view, and actually if you go to, yeah, it's under view. If you go down here to rulers and make sure those are turned on, you'll see that you get these rulers here along your viewport. If you click on these and drag down, you'll get these basically guidelines that will come and they'll appear. So if you just click on the ruler and then drag out and release, you get these guidelines that you can move around and align to different parts of your image. All right, so let me undo those really quick and recreate them. If I were to create a new ruler line, I could drag that down and align it right to the edge of this image and release. And I could basically do that around all four sides of the image. But these are nice because they allow you to snap to different elements inside of the image file. So now that I have four guidelines right around that image, if I go in and add to my selection, you can see that my cursor wants to snap directly to those guidelines that I created, which is really nice. Okay, so that's how we can select using Magic Wand and using the rectangular marquee tool. Another tool that we have available to us that I really like is the Polygono Lasso tool. So right here, if you were to click on this and hold, you can see we have these different lasso tool options. I like this one that says polygonal lasso. So if you select on that, basically this lets you create selections based on a number of points that you select manually. So if I went in here and I held plus to add to my selection, or I held shift to get the little plus sign to add to my selection, I could go in here and select a number of points along the edge of this leaf and get it as close as I can okay, and now that I'm in here, I don't really need to be as accurate because this stuff is already selected, but I can basically go in here around the edge of this leaf, and when I get back to the original start of the selection, I can click again to complete that and it'll add to my selection. If there was a point I selected here that I don't like, I can click the backspace key and that will undo each of those points, as far back as I want to go. But if I just keep this going, I can complete this selection here, and you can see now that I have a nice selection of this gray space inside of this plant. Okay, so that's the tool that I like to use mostly. I usually use my polygonal lasso, and I will go around and find different parts of the image, and I will select them individually using points. So here, for example, I could go in and use a ruler guide here along this window, and then maybe I will use a rectangular selection, use my shift key to add to my original selection, and then I will drag, snap to that, and I will come down here and I will get it right along the top edge of that lampshade and then release. Now when I did that, you can see that I added too much of this little leaf inside of here. So then I could just switch back to my polygon tool, polygonal lasso, and I can use the Alt key to subtract away from my selection, and I can just use that to go right along the edge of this leaf. And now once I get to this point, I can just finish that off and go back to the center. And when I do that, you can see it subtracts away from my selection. Okay, so I'm just going to do this a little bit more right here along the edge. Just going to use my polygon tool and add over here to get the rest of this into my selection. All right, and that is starting to look pretty good. There's still more work to do, obviously, but at this point, once we get our selection decently in place how we like it, we can go ahead and preserve that selection with what is known as a layer mask. All right, so if we go down here to our layers with our selection still intact, we want to click on this button here, and this is the layer mask button. All right, so I'm going to click on that, and when I did that, you can see it added this little black and white tile to my image. Okay. If I was to hide the background image, you could see exactly what that did. So basically now it's masking out just those portions of the image that I selected. The entire image is still there, but it's only showing me what I had selected. Okay, it's masking out everything else. If I were to right click on that and click on disable, you can see the entire image comes back, and you can see this little X that appears through the layer mask. All right, so whenever we're working in AutoCAD, what we want to do is use layer masks whenever we're making selections, so that way we preserve the entire image. The alternative would be to, let's bring back that selection here really quick. The alternative, which a lot of people do by mistake, is they make a selection and then they would maybe delete out what they don't want or only save that portion. So if I were to copy this part of the image and paste it back in, you can see now I have achieved the same thing on its own layer, but that's the entire layer and there's no option for me to bring back the rest of it. Okay, so instead of copying out pieces of the image individually and pasting them in and stuff like that, you want to use these layer masks so that way you can still have full control over the rest of the image. If you want to go back and change something about your selection, you have that ability. All right, so I'm going to delete that back out. Yes, and then we're going to bring back everything here. All right, so at this point now, you can see that my selection that I had before is gone. The little marching ants are no longer on the screen. To bring those marching ants back, what I can do is hold my control key, and then when I do that, you can see when I hover over the image preview tile, I get this little square that pops up, and if you click now on the tile, actually we do it on the mask. So if I click on the mask now, it's going to bring back my selection. Okay, and I can keep going in here and I can keep adding to my selection as usual. All right, so if I were to go in here and then maybe add in portions of the sofa, see, now my selection's going around that sofa nicely, and then I can go in and add this little piece here. So basically I want to do that and just keep adding to my selection. And now every time we add to our selection, we want to update our layer mask. So if you think about a mask, basically looking at this image, anything that is in black is what is not being shown whenever we are masking. So if I turn off my background layer, you can see that anything that is in black is being hidden, and anything in white is being shown. So everything that is in white on this mask is what's being shown, so we can see our walls are appearing. If I want to update my layer mask, what I basically have to do is paint in either white or black for things that I want to show or hide. So you want to make sure your layer mask is selected, and that is designated by the brackets around the layer mask itself. And then you want to go in and go to Edit and Fill. And then if you're wanting to show something, you would paint it in with white. If you're wanting to hide something, you want to paint it with black. So since creating this layer mask, I have added in this portion here, and this is portion of the wall that I want to show. So if I go in here and I go to my foreground color setting under contents, I'd want to switch that to white and then click OK. And when I do that, you'll see what will happen. So I click OK, and it adds in even more of my wall there. All right, so now if I were to go in here and actually invert my mask, you would see what I mean by what the black and white values actually do. So I'm going to turn off this background layer really quick so we just get back to what I have masked on this top layer. And if I were to deselect everything, so if I have my selection made, holding Control and D will deselect. Now if I'm on my layer mask tile and I hit Control and I, that's going to invert the layer mask, and now you can see that the white region and the black region are flipped, and you can see now the wall is missing but everything else is shown, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Anything that is white, it will be visible. Anything that's black will disappear. So I'm going to invert that back to just the wall. I'll bring back my background layer, and then I'm going to basically continue going through here until I get the entirety of my wall selected. So I'll do a couple more like little areas, and then I'm going to just cut to where I have all my selections made, and then I will let you do the same, okay? So for example, maybe I'll do this region in here, since this is relatively enclosed and the colors are pretty well defined. For that, I could just go in and use my I can use my magic wand tool. So if I were to click on my magic wand and then go in here to this spot and then click, you can see that it does an okay job, but we want to add more to this. So I'll hold shift and I will add more of these little regions in here. And then if I'm happy with it, I can go ahead and add it to my selection on my mask, or I can go in here with my polygon tool then and clean it up just a little bit better. Okay, and as I'm doing this, you can pay close attention to the keys I'm hitting and the mouse buttons I'm clicking just by referring to my overlay that's at the top of the screen up here, in case you're getting a little bit confused. All right, so now with that new selection, I can go back in here, make sure I'm on my layer mask, not the layer itself. You want to make sure that we click on the actual mask and then go into edit and then fill and then click white to add that to our layer mask. And then you can always confirm by turning off your background layer and making sure that that stays visible whenever that background layer is gone. All right, something else that you can do with these layer masks, which is kind of cool, and I'm just going to illustrate this really quickly before I cut to what I have finished, because maybe you guys will want to do some of this when you're creating your own selections, is use paintbrush tools to control what is being selected and what's not. So if I turn off my background layer again, and I make sure that my layer mask is selected, I can go in here with a paintbrush tool, and since I'm on my layer mask, you can see I only get two options, black or white. Okay, I can go in here and I can actually paint my layer mask, and I can paint things that I want to be visible or want to be invisible. So if I were to reverse this now so that I'm painting with white, and I go in here and I start painting, you can see that if let me switch this to a hard brush, I'm basically painting in portions to this layer mask. You can see that updating as I paint, and I'm bringing back things that I want to show. Now, if I were to reverse this back to black, I could paint these things back out, things that I don't want to show. Okay, so if I were to turn my background back on then, for example, I could go in here and I could adjust my paintbrush size, and I could just paint in some of these regions. So if I were to paint in something, like set my brush really small, I could go in here and I could just paint over this. And then you see if I turn off my background, let me redo that. I was painting in black. So if I switch this to white and I do that same thing, if I turn off my background now, you can see that it's starting to add that back in. So this is really good for like touching up the edges of your selections. So if you wanted to like soften this a bit, if it like looks a little bit too jaggedy, you could go in and, you know, add some black to that and sort of go over the edge to soften that down a little bit so that it's not such a hard line. Okay, but basically what I'm going to do is go in here and add in all the rest of these regions. Make sure that you get them all on your screen, and you don't have to be like the most accurate, just get it relatively close. Okay, and then every time you add a new selection, you want to go back to your layer mask and then edit and fill with white. And you don't have to do them individually, like one at a time. You can go through and you can select several regions. So if I went in and I selected this whole thing, okay, and then selected like a few more maybe. Once you have a bunch of them, like now I have 3 at the same time, you can go in and then go edit, fill, white, okay? And you just want to keep going on that until you get the entire wall. So this whole back wall, and then this portion here, and then this portion here. And then make sure you get as much of like the little bits as you can as well, okay? And then you just want to turn off your background layer and just make sure as you're going through that you've gotten everything selected. If you want to check that against the actual background itself, you can leave the background turned on. Then you can hold Control and click on the mask, and that will bring back your selections, and you'll be able to see exactly what is being included on your layer mask, okay? All right, so now I'm going to go through and stop talking, and I'm just going to complete all these selections, and then you can go ahead and refer back to this if you're confused about how to select any of these things, and you can see exactly how I'm going to do it, all right? So here on these plants, you don't have to be super precise, just get it as good as you can, all right? So just use the magic wand tool, set the tolerance to something relatively low, make sure contiguous is checked, and go around and just get as many of the little pieces as you can because it's not gonna really be that big of a deal. All right, so now my selection is completed, and if I click my control key and then choose my mask, you can see exactly what you need to have selected on your screen. If you have your guidelines still available or still visible, you can go up here to your view tab and then click on clear guides, and that will get rid of them. Actually, I have one more small area. I'm just going to select that really quick as well. All right, so we'll just get that in there, and then we will go make sure we're on our layer mask, edit, fill, and white. Okay, so that should be pretty much everything, and then if there's anything else that I missed, we'll be able to see it after we complete the next step. Okay, so with our layer mask finished, if we turn off our background, we should see everything in here that we want. Although we do see a little bit of this leaf, which I will remove. So if I deselect everything, go in here with my selection tool and then highlight this leaf using my polygonal lasso like that. I will make sure that I'm on my layer mask. I will go to edit, fill, and choose black, and that will get rid of it. Okay, so that looks good. That's what we were looking for. All right, so I'll bring back my background. So the next step of this is to choose a new paint color for this wall. So what I'm going to do is pull up Sherwin-Williams website. Okay, so I just went to sherwinwilliams.com and I went to their paint colors, and I'm just going to go in here and select a color that maybe I want to change the walls to. All right, so let's say I choose one of these red colors in here. Sure, we will choose this one. And then if we go to view the details and go to a preview, what we're looking for is under here within the details section, you want to find the RGB value. So if you remember back to previously in this video, I mentioned we will be using an RGB color space within Photoshop. And that's useful because when you go to some of these websites to find paint colors and stuff like that, usually they give you the RGB values, and that allows you to match the colors exactly. All right, so in this case, the RGB values that we want to copy are R is 183, G is 78, and B is 79. Okay, so if we write those down, and then you can choose any color you want. Choose a color that's different than the one I'm choosing, but go in and find a color, go to details, and then find the RGB value of it. You want to go back in here then to Photoshop, and what we want to do is using our, well, actually, we're going to create one new layer over top of our background layer, and we're going to rename this wall paint. Okay, so this is going to be the new layer that we apply the paint color to. Okay, before we do that, what we want to do is we want to go in here to the layer below, and we want to highlight our selection. So I'm going to hit Control and highlight that selection, and then making sure I am on my actual image. So make sure that you have the brackets around the actual image here. I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and then I'm going to click on Desaturate. All right, so that was really subtle, but what it did, it got rid of the bluish hue and it made it just a desaturated gray color. That's what we're gonna want to have whenever we go in to add our new color, because we don't want our new color mixing with the old color that's under it. You can also desaturate. If I undo that, if you hit Control Shift and U at the same time, it will do the same thing. So it's really subtle, but now you can see that this is totally gray instead of blue. If I toggle this on and off, you can see that's slightly blue, and now the new color is totally gray. All right, so with my selection still made, right? So I'm making sure my marching ants are on and my selection is still there. I'm going on to my wall paint layer, and I'm clicking on the mask button again to apply the exact same mask to my wall paint layer. All right, so now once that is done, I want to make sure my selection is not on the mask. I want to click on the actual layer itself. Okay, you'll know that you're on the layer itself if your background and foreground colors are actual colors, not black and white. You can see when I switch back, it's black and white. You want that to be on your actual layer. So now what I'm going to do is go up to Edit and then Fill. Where it says Contents, I'm going to click the drop down and I'm going to click on Color. And now within here, we want to find this section that says RGB. This is where we enter in those values that we wrote down from Sherwin-Williams website. So for R, I'm going to type in 183. For G, I'm going to type in 78. And for B, I'm going to type in 79. And now in our preview, you can see the exact color that we had on Sherwin-Williams website. So that should be an exact match. Okay, when that's done, I'm going to click on OK. And then I'm going to click OK one more time. So now we have basically applied the color to the background, but you can see that obviously there's no shadows or anything that are coming through. All right, so to do that, we have to use what are known as blend modes. And blend modes are something that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper later on as we keep going with Photoshop. But basically, what a blend mode does is it allows us to blend what is underneath a layer with itself. Okay, so I'll be able to bring those shadows and everything back, and it won't just be the solid color. So with my layer selected, I want to go up here to where it says normal. Right now it's on the normal blend mode, and I want to just toggle through these different blend modes. So as I move my mouse across them, you can get a preview of what's going to happen if we select those different blend modes. All right. So if I were to find one like multiply, for instance, you can see exactly what's going to happen. As I go in here and choose multiply, you can see that we're getting those shadows that are coming through. All right, so if I click on multiply, you can see that the paint color updated, but we have a few things that we need to fix, obviously. So we can see that the line work is a little bit jaggedy, and I got a little bit too much of this selected over here. So we can go in and on our layer mask, we can add and remove using a paintbrush. So now if I switch to my paintbrush tool and I make this a little bit bigger and I make sure that I'm on my layer mask, I can go in here and switch to, well, I want to make sure that this is black, so I'm erasing. And if I go and I start coloring around on the edges of this, you can see how that just softens out that transition and makes it look a little bit better. All right, so I'm going to go around here and I'm just going to edit the size of my brush, and I'm just going to get that nice and smoothed out. Another tip, if you click once in one location and then you move to another location and then you hold shift and click one more time, it will draw a straight line between those two spots. So that's a really easy way to go around and very quickly soften up these edges. All right, but you just want to go around here to where it's obvious, and you want to clean up this mask so that everything reads a lot softer. If there's an area like this where we didn't get enough, what you want to do is switch your color from black to white and then go in and just paint in the region that you missed. Okay, so I'm going to make that a little bit smaller, get right here in this crease, and then just get really detailed with it and get exactly what I want. Okay, then when you zoom out and it looks good, you'll know that you did a good job. So switch back to black. So now I'm going to cut to me going around and cleaning up all these edges like I did with the selections, and you can follow along at your own pace and see exactly what I'm doing. All right, so here we are with the mask totally done. So our plants look a lot better, and sort of the edges around everything looks a lot better and cleaned up. Yours doesn't have to be quite this precise. You know, if it's a little bit jaggedy, that's totally fine. The whole point is just to get the idea of how we use masks and how we can start adding in different colors and changing things about these images, okay? But at this point, now that we have our mask made, it's really cool because we can go in here and we can basically just edit our color and change it to whatever we want to be. So for example, if I duplicate this layer, so if I have my layer selected and I hit Control J, and then I turn off the one that's underneath of it, what I can do with this selected is go in here to image adjustments and then go to where it says hue and saturation, and then I can edit the actual color of my paint. So I could go in here and change the hue, and you can see it's very easy to jump between different color options. We can change the saturation of it maybe if we want it to be like a little bit more muted, but you can basically just choose a color and then come in here and play around and very easily get an idea of how different colors will look inside of the space. All right, so that's pretty neat. So let me just set something like blue maybe, and then click OK. So it's very simple to just go in here and change things once you have your masks set up. To reiterate, if I were to turn off this mask, everything would you just have blue all over everything. So like I said, the purpose of the mask, we're not taking away from the image, we're just hiding portions of the image based on the black and white colors. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do really quick is just show you how we can change the like maybe the picture back here to something else, and then I'm going to have you change one more thing about the image on your own, and then you will turn it in as part of the lab assignment. All right. All right, so here I am on Google Images, and I just looked up landscape photos, and I'm just going to pick this first one here, and this is what I'm going to put behind the sofa to replace the image that's currently there. So what I want to do is click on the image and then right click and then choose copy image. Then I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and when I'm in Photoshop, I'm going to use Control and V on my keyboard to paste the image into the viewport. All right. So once we have that, you can see here is my image, and it's overlaid on top of the actual background image. And we can see when we paste in, it gives it a new layer. And on this layer, we can go ahead and we can rename that to landscape photo. Or something appropriate based on whatever picture you end up choosing. Okay, now with that done, make sure you have your selection tool on, and this is just our basic, our move tool that we use to move objects around on the screen. You can see if I have my landscape photo layer currently selected, I can click and I can drag and I can move that landscape photo around anywhere I want. With that selected, what you want to do is make sure you have this option turned on right here. This is really important. It's called Show Transform Controls. And what that lets you do is basically move and scale and manipulate the image. Okay. So when you have the transform controls turned on and you're on your move tool, what you'll be able to do is you'll see these grips here on all the corners and on all the sides. What those let you do is if you hover over, you can basically scale the image in one direction. If you hold shift, you can scale basically disproportionately. If you let go of that, basically it's going to scale uniformly so that you're not messing up the, you're not distorting the image at all. So you can see there I'm distorting the image, and then here if I release it, you can see that I'm not. Same with the corners, okay? But with those on, another thing you can do, which we're going to get into a little bit more in depth later on, is if you hold Control and you hover over the corners, you'll see that white arrow pops up. Now if you click and drag when that white arrow is up, you'll be able to distort the perspective of the image. So this is going to be really helpful for placing like decals on walls that are rendered in perspective or something. But whenever we keep going on Photoshop, we'll use this functionality to do some pretty cool things. All right, but right now what we're going to do is put this image right over top of the image of the cow that's in the background. Now, as you can see, we have no idea where that cow is without turning off this layer. So what we have to do is mess with this setting right here, which is our layer opacity. Layer opacity controls the transparency of the image, and if we click on that and turn it down, you can see that our layer will start to fade away gradually, and we can basically get the two overlaying on top of each other. All right, so with that turned down to somewhere around 74, 75, what I can do is I can start using my transform tools, and if I were to hold shift now to transform non-uniformly, I can basically control exactly where that point is going to go on the photograph. So if I zoom in here a little bit closer and get that exactly where I want it to be, I can release it when I'm finished. Now basically I want to go around and do this for these two corners here, these opposite corners, and that's going to get my photograph in the exact right spot where I want it. All right, and now that that's done, I can turn the opacity back up. So that's pretty good. The only thing is we didn't do any blending, so we're not going to be seeing any of these shadows or anything like that. So another thing that we can do is actually go in and paint in some shadowing effects on top of this, so that way it looks a little bit more convincing, like we have some depth here on this frame. Now one way to do that is with our layer effects, okay? And in this video I'm just kind of giving you guys a brief overview of some of these tools, so you just get a sampling of how we can use them. And just remember, we'll go into these in more detail later on. But layer effects basically are individual kind of special effects that you can apply on a layer by layer basis. And one of these layer effects adds a shadow on the inner portion of whatever object is on that layer. All right, so to add this layer effect, what you want to do is come down here at the bottom, make sure you're on your landscape photo layer, or whatever your picture is, and click on this effects button. This is our layer effects options, and the one that we are looking for is inner shadow. All right, so if we click on inner shadow, we get this little window that pops up with a bunch of options, and we can control different things about our shadow. Okay, so now if you look in the background here, you're going to see already there's a slight shadow that is being projected onto the image. All right, so up here at the top you can see it's a little bit darker, and on the left side it's slightly darker still. If you mess around with these settings in this layer style box that came up, we can see sort of what's going on. So if I turn that up, you can see now that the shadow is kind of being amplified a little bit. All right, and we can edit other things like the distance. So right now it's being projected from the upper right to the lower left, and that angle is controlled right here by this little angle slider. All right, so the distance is really high right now, but if we were to turn our distance down to 0 and then just leave this setting off, we could just make it look like there is a gradual tiny little shadow coming in from all sides of this image. And if we control this size slider, we can make that slightly bigger or larger based on our preference. All right, so something in this range I think looks pretty good and is pretty close to what we had beforehand with the original image. So once that's done, just go ahead and click on OK, and you can see now we have our layer style applied to our photo, and that looks a little bit more convincing. And then with these effects, you can go in here and you can easily toggle them on and off to see exactly what's going on, to get a good idea of what you have done. All right, so the final thing that I'm going to do is show you how to modify the colors of different parts of your image. All right, this will be the last thing that I show you for this little exercise. And basically, like I said, whenever you complete this on your own, you'll have to choose 3 things about the image to modify. They can be the exact same 3 things that I do, but just make them slightly different, okay? That might be a different paint color, or it might be a different image, or a different chair color in this instance is what I'm going to show you. All right, so if I'm modifying the color of this chair, what I want to do is modify the actual layer that the chair is on. So in this case, we're going to use this background copy layer that we created. And since we no longer need a layer mask on it, since we use the layer mask to create our paint colors, what I can do is go in here and I can right click on the layer mask and I can delete the layer mask. All right. So with the layer mask deleted, I'm going to go in here with this layer selected and I'm going to start creating some selections around portions of this chair. So to start out with, I will go in and I will select the front part of this chair. Like that. And then at this point, what I'm going to do is add in my adjustment layer that is going to allow me to easily change the color of the chair. So I can go in here and the adjustment layer is this little button right here. If I click on that, it gives me different options for things in the image that I want to change. In this case, I want to change the hue and saturation of the image. So I'm going to click on hue, saturation. And now nothing has really happened. It doesn't really look like it, except we get this window that's popped up. And if you look here, we have a new layer that is on top of our background copy layer, and this one's called hue/saturation 1. All right, and it looks slightly different than the other layers because we get this little icon here, and this icon indicates that it is an adjustment layer. All right, so now if I go in here and I start messing around with these sliders, you'll see what's happening. The actual hue of that chair, the color, is starting to change. All right, so let's say we want it to be like a bluish color leather or something like that. So if I go in here and then I turn on the saturation slightly, well, let's do like something complementary to my paint color. So something a little bit more on the red side, I guess. All right, so let's say I've settled on that color. Whenever I'm done with this and get it how I like, I can go ahead and just exit out of this window. And now what we're going to do is we are going to add to the layer mask of this adjustment layer. So if I right click on that, you can see I get my selection back, and that's the only thing. It's very small, but that's the only thing that's in white on this layer mask. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go in here just like I did with the wall, and I'm going to start adding pieces to my selection. All right, I'm not going to be very particular because I will go back in later and I will take out the things I don't want with the paintbrush, but I can go in here and go around and get this relatively close. Like that, and then whenever we get it to where we want, instead of going in and filling with white to make that visible in the layer mask, we can actually click Control and I to invert that portion of the layer mask. And so since we're inverting something that is already black on the layer mask, it's just going to turn it to white automatically. So if we hit Control and I at this point, that's going to invert that color for us automatically, and you can see now that has been added to the layer mask. Now all I have to do is go in with a paintbrush, and if I go to my paintbrush tool and I switch my color to black, I can go in here and adjust the size of my paintbrush, and I can paint out pieces of this plant and some of the other things that I don't want to be included in the color modification. All right, so then you can just go in here and you can add as you need. So if I need to add in, say, this armrest, you can just switch your color to white, go in and paint over top of that, and get as much of that in as you need. Okay. All right, so that's pretty good. Okay, so that's basically what I want you to do for this assignment. I want you to choose 3 things and then modify those 3 things about the image. And then one last thing that is a requirement is we're going to add our name to this so that I can see your name on the screen. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of everything else. So I'll go to my very top layer in the stack, and then I'm going to click to add a new layer. I'm going to call this my name, and I will add in text. So the text tool is right here. First, I want to set my foreground color to white. So I will click on my foreground color. I will change that to white by clicking and dragging and releasing in the top left corner and click OK. And then I'm going to go to my text tool. I'm going to click up here in this empty space, and I'm going to type my name. And I will switch the font to something reasonable. All right, something like that. Okay, so this is what I want. Whenever you get to the assignment, I want you to have your name shown on the screen. I want your 3 changes, and I want you to take a screenshot of the entire screen so I can see all of your layers. I can see your viewport, I can see your toolbars, everything. I want to see the entire Photoshop screen, make sure that your name is shown. All right, and that is the first part of this week's assignment. The second part of this week's assignment I'm going to jump to now. Hopefully it should be a little bit more straightforward and fun for you guys, and we will jump into that now. All right, guys, so here's the second part of this week's assignment. We're going to be going back to preschool here for a little bit, except we're going to be doing it Photoshop style. So I have this file here, Adobe Coloring Book Chapter 1. I want you to open this, and basically I want you to select one of the images that is within this layer stack, and I want you to completely color it in using the Magic Wand tool and our fill tools. All right, so you can choose any one of these 5 or 6 images that are in here. So basically you'd want to turn off these eyeballs and then turn on the next layer to see it. If you don't do that, you'll see them on top of each other, but you can toggle through and find one that you like. It doesn't matter which one, and you can color it in however you like. All right, so I'm going to give you just a very quick example of how this is going to work. What you want to do is choose the one that you want and then create a new layer on top of it. Okay. Once you've done that, I want you to go in here and use your Magic Wand tool and go around and select portions of the image that you're then going to fill in with a color of your choosing. All right, so if I'm on here, basically I'm going to select a portion of the image with the Magic Wand, and then I can go in here on my color picker. I can choose a color that I like. All right, and then once I have my color that I want, I can use a tool that we haven't used yet, which is our Paint Bucket tool. So our Paint Bucket tool is over here on the left side underneath of our gradient tool. So if you click on your gradient tool and hold, you'll see the Paint Bucket tool. So once you've made a selection, you can go ahead and you can just click within the selection, and that is going to add that color to where you have highlighted. All right. So basically that's all I want you to do. You don't need to use like layer masks or anything like that. We're already getting enough practice with layer masks with some of our other things. I want you to just get used to using your magic wand tool and going in and selecting portions of this image and filling them in with colors, okay? So you can do as many as you want to be the same color. So I could go around here and select a bunch of different parts of the image at once, as long as I'm just holding shift and clicking and making my selections. When I'm done with my selection, I can go in here and then I can use the paint bucket tool again, and I can click inside of those selections and it's going to fill all of them automatically for me. All right, so then you can just go in and choose a different color, go back to your magic wand tool and go around and select different parts of the image, go back to your paint bucket and fill them in. Okay, so I want you to do that for all of them. I want you to do it for the background as well. Whenever you do this, make sure you have contiguous turned on, or else it's just going to select all of the white regions on the screen, which is not what you want. So turn on contiguous. Here I'm going to add in the background colors. Okay. Go back to paint bucket and paint in the background. All right, so pretty straightforward. So just make sure you go in here and you paint the entire thing in however you like. And then I want you to add in the your name like we did on the previous one. So if I go in here and choose the type tool, make sure that my foreground color is set to white, and then click up here at the top, I can add my name. Just like that, and then just move it to a spot where I can easily see it on your screen. All right, so make sure you have all these shapes colored in, and make sure that I can see your name at the top of the screen, and then take a screenshot of the entire screen, okay? So I can see the layers panel and everything, all right? And then that is what you're going to upload as the answer for the assignment, all right? Hopefully you have some fun with this. Hopefully it's not too bad, and that's it.